Thank you so much for staying with us. Across Nigeria, the rains are here. And for many communities, they have brought devastation. In Mokwa, Niger State, what began as an overnight downpour became one of the deadliest floods in decades. 150 lives lost, dozens still missing, thousands displaced. In Kwara State, swollen rivers have forced families from their homes. In River State, streets have turned into waterways, crippling daily life and trade. In Lagos, the roads have become seaways. These are not isolated events. They are a stark reminder of the growing threat of extreme weather and the urgent need for preparedness. This morning on Sunrise, we bring you the perspectives that need to be addressed and how do we turn this tragedy into lasting change. Let's begin with two gentlemen with us this morning. Mr. Suleiman Arigbabu is here with me in the studio. He is Executive Secretary, Header Resource Center. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, James.
We also have Stephen Jabo, who is Head of the Department of Hydrogeophysics and Technical Advisor to the DG of the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, NISA. He joins us from Abuja. Good morning and thank you for joining us, sir. And
yeah, good morning, sir. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
And we have Mr. Nemo Bassi, who is an environmental activist. He joins us virtually. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Mr. Bassi. This is not something that is new. We've been talking about this since forever, and it's not like we didn't know that these things are going to happen. And what I have to be honest with you, Mr. Bassi, every year, as frequently as we have to talk about this, I have to be honest with you, it's depressing and disappointing. I don't know what you can, what you think we are missing, if we are missing anything, or we're just daring the odds.
Well, I think one thing we're doing that we could say we're doing right is the fact that at least we're able to announce that the floods are coming and even to pinpoint the areas that will be most affected. But in terms of preparation to respond or to, we are not there yet. But in terms of preparation to respond grounds, or to, we are not there yet because you tell people to move to higher grounds. And in places like the coastal line of Nigeria, there's virtually no higher ground. So where do you tell people to move to? This is the crisis we're having. And so generally, we don't really appear to understand the severity of the crisis. And the crisis is going to get deeper. This is the challenge. We're going to have more due to global warming or climate change. And so if the floods are going to be heavier, rains are going to be more intense, the fact that we can't handle what we are confronting with now is a serious issue that should concern us.
We get reports from time to time, Mr. Jabo, from the agencies like the Hydrological Services Agency, like NIMET, and the reports usually go as late as, say, November in any year. November, December in any year. And from time to time, we get updates. Guys, in 2 days, this is going to happen. In 3 days, that's going to happen. Help us understand what's the level of response or reaction to the notices that agencies like yours put out from time to time, particularly at the states level.
The notification for flood occurrences in Nigeria is not given in November, but is given in April before the onset of the rainy season. Now, the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency issues flood forecast as well as early warning for flooding. The agency has been doing that since the year 2013 after the devastating flood of 2012. Every year, we come out with this annual flood outlook, usually before the onset of the rainy season in the country, which is in April. Rainy season starts in April and ends in November, mostly in Nigeria. So we come out with this annual flood outlook, which gives the detailed flooding scenario that is expected to happen in Nigeria every year from the month of April to November, giving details of the magnitude of the flooding that are expected to happen in Nigeria, the time it is expected to happen, and the various locations in terms of the communities that the flooding are expected to happen. Now, this year, we came out with the annual flood outlook, which was unveiled by the Honorable Minister of Water Resources and Sanitation, Professor Joseph Utsef Talumun, on 10th of April, 2025. And the highlights of that annual flood outlook were that about 1,249 communities in 176 local government areas in 30 states plus FCT are going to experience high flood risk this year, beginning from April to November. Likewise, more communities in more local government areas and in 36 state plus FCT were expected to fall within the moderate flood risk areas. Now, apart from this annual flood outlook, this is the period of heavy rainfall in Nigeria. The month of July, August, and September are the period of high rainfall in Nigeria. And therefore, we expect to see flooding in most part of the country. Now, the floodings that are witnessing in Nigeria now are mostly from riverine flooding, flash flooding, and urban flooding. Now, the agency also, on a weekly basis, comes out with what we also call weekly flood notification.
Well, Mr. Jabo, if you can hear me, we'll come back to those issues. Just 1 second. We'll come back to those details. My question was about the response from the states, the state governments in particular. Do you think there is a show of proactiveness? And you are correct. We get the update sometimes from around April at the offset of the rains, but I remember getting notices about the rain for next year and the previous year. The idea, I thought at the time, was for the state governments in particular to prepare. These things happen every year. It's going to happen again. What are we doing about it? I'm just asking whether or not you think, whether it comes in April or it comes before the new year, whether you think the states are proactive enough to act on those things, the information you give out to them before calamity befalls?
Yes and no. Yes, because only few states take proactive measures in their state to mitigate the negative impact of flooding expected in their communities. For instance, the state like Bayelsa, Lagos, Jigawa, they have been doing a lot by constructing more drainage systems within their state, dredging or desilting of rivers and dams within their state, relocating vulnerable communities that are located on low-lying topography to higher grounds. Now, in states like Bayelsa that has a low and flat topography that is so difficult to find a higher land to move affected communities, what can be done by such state are that they can engage on dredging of these rivers to enhance their storage and carrying capacity. Because, for instance, Bayelsa is the last state at the coast, and most of the waters that are carried by the two biggest rivers, rivers Niger and Benue, plus their tributaries, eventually end up in Bayelsa and empties into the Atlantic Ocean. And the flood waters find it difficult to recede because of the flat terrain. So what can be done in such areas are to continue to intensify dredging of the rivers, as well as construction of more drainage systems that can accommodate most of the excess flood water. In addition to that, Bayelsa also is a coastal state that suffers from coastal flooding because of sea level rise, tidal storms, and so on, is to build levees, flood walls, embankments, so that to prevent seawater surges inland. So these are some of the structural measures that the state can take. Now, the state are aware, because every year we send this flood outlook result to them, report to them, to their state emergency management agencies, to the state government, to take proactive actions before the onset of the rainy season. But what we are seeing is that most of these states are not being very proactive. Rather, it seems like we need to wait for flooding to happen before we now take reactive measures to curtail the impact of flooding. And that is not good at all, because by the time flooding is here, flood knows no one, destructions are made, people's lives are lost, livelihood are lost, people are displaced, critical infrastructures are destroyed, like road, bridges, railways, houses submerged and destroyed. And this amount to colossal economic losses to the country. We are of the view at Nigeria Hydrological Services that prevention is better than cure.
And that's what this whole conversation is about.
And how do we prevent this flooding?
Just a second. We'll come to those solutions, Mr. Jabo. But let's just raise the issues. Let's understand how severe the matters on hand are. Well, Mr. Arigwabudi, I don't know what your thoughts are about that, the point that he made about the governors, like particularly the state governments, being proactive enough.
Yes, thank you. I kind of agree with him that, but more on the no side, really. And like Reverend Nemo said, we have improved on our ability to forecast what's going to happen, even though that still needs a lot of hands-on. But our ability to forecast is not really matched with our ability to respond proactively. Some of the flooding that we have seen this year has been, unfortunately, on goal against us. It is not to put a blame on anyone, but the reality, for instance, when you look at what happened in some parts of Lagos around the, in some axes in Lagos where it flooded because maybe a contractor that was doing something needed to clear a path for the rains, you know, and they didn't, and it flooded, and homes were affected. If you look at the flooding that happened in Mokwa, because it's not actually everything that NISA can predict. Flash flooding can happen for so many reasons that is not on your radar. There are things they are looking out for. So for the contractor who had to block something because he's doing a job, and then the rains came and that place was not unclogged and it flooded, NISA couldn't probably have seen that, neither could NIMET. You know, so we need extra eye on some of these things. When you look at the flooding that happened in Mokwa, that flooding, that area that flooded actually had been knocking for years, you know, because there's a railway embankment that has kept the water at bay. But snippets of the water have been going through the communities, because we were there on ground, and the communities confessed that actually they know that historically this was a river path. It's a flood path, but they have built it up entirely. And that every year they see the water, it comes, but it meanders and finds its way. But this time around, it's destroyed the railway embankment and hit the community, and then we had loss of lives in the hundreds. So many of the floods that we have been seeing are really, for me, own goals, because we are not doing what we ought to do. Unfortunately, the big flood has not yet come. We have not heard of any opening of any dam, as it were. The people along Lagos, they have not opened Oyon Dam. We know what's going to happen there. They have not opened up, released the Lagdo Dam and so many of the dams. So we know that towards the end of the year, the big flooding will come that destroys farms. And the ones that we have the best chance to reduce, because really we can't run away from it. Climate change, part of its consequences is that we are going to have intense heavy rains, than we had before, or sometimes no rain when we should have rain. So you really cannot predict much. But the ones that we have the ability to prepare for the most, especially, are the flash flooding, because wherever you see flash flooding, it's usually because we as citizens, we as government, have either done something that should not be done, or have failed to do the right thing. So
now, the issue you raised about the construction job going on, you are very correct. There is no way NIMED could have seen the civil disobedience, if I can use the term. NISA couldn't also have seen that civil disobedience. It goes back to the issue I raised about whether or not the state governments at various levels are proactive enough. NISA will give the outlook, and NIMED will predict whatever it is that they do. And though one can praise the yeoman's job that some state governments are doing, you've pointed out the students, our failure as citizens to do some needful stuff. That should come with certain consequences. So at what point do we lose? What are the things that, when you say things that state government should do that they didn't do, things that they shouldn't do that they have done, what are some of those things?
Okay, so you see, some things happen and you'll be like, okay, this is why it happened. And maybe everybody goes scot-free and we take the lessons. But the problem with Nigeria is that it's going to happen the following year. It's going to happen again and again, and that's largely because there are no consequences. So, for instance, if a contractor was building, there needs to be an extra eye that is keeping an eye on NISA, on NIMED's predictions. We had the July break, and it didn't rain for over 2 weeks. At least it didn't rain heavily in most parts. And we know when it was going to start raining, because NIMED started to say, oh, there's going to be heavy rain system in so places. There should have been an extra high to be on that, to tell people who are constructing or doing whatever and needed to block drain paths to say, no, you need to unclog now and let the waters move. But okay, if that happened, the problem we are having is that it's going to happen again elsewhere, even in this Lagos and in other parts of the country. So that's quite unfortunate. And you see this across the country. Nobody is keeping... look at, for instance, the Alao Dam collapse in Maiduguri. There's no consequences. Nobody has suffered anything because of it. Nobody has had to answer any question, at least not in the public knowledge, has had to answer questions for that. And this is something that destroys people's lives, livelihoods, and properties. It's something that could have been prevented. Even according to the governor of the state, he said that this thing is something they were aware of. This thing is something that the authorities in charge ought to have, fixed the dam and all of. But it happened. But we have not heard, at least in the public domain, that any action has been taken. So don't be surprised that such will happen elsewhere. We're a country where there are no consequences, at least on the part of government officials mostly. There are no consequences for such failures. And the implication of not having such consequences is that history will continue to repeat itself negatively, and we need to do something about it.
Okay. let me ask you, Mr. Bassi. There is something they call climate justice, and I want to believe that you are very well aware of it. And so, when the International Court of Justice gave an advisory on that one, and Mr. Arigwabu here is saying that there are no consequences, do you think that is something to play on, Mr. Bassi?
Not at all. It's a serious matter. Climate injustice or climate justice is a serious issue that many governments, unfortunately, do not take to heart. We seem to play along with those who are creating the crisis rather than standing up and defending ourselves. The climate crisis we're encountering, the heavy rains, are happening because some people are pumping carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases to the atmosphere far more than what could be permissible. And these are people who are, through production, through the burning of fossil fuels, through the undue consumption and dumping of waste across the world, these are creating the problems. And in Nigeria, of course, the climate justice demands that those who create the problem should do the most to solve that problem. But here we are always offloading the challenges on the victims. Even nationally, this is not just a global matter. It happens at a national level. We heard that some states are taking actions, but communities are not being supported. Communities are not being supported across the board. If you go to the coastal communities, you find the flood lines where the floods rose up on their walls in 2018, in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. All those lines are there. The fact that the lines are there on the wall, you can still read them so many years after, indicates to us that there's a serious economic consequences to this flooding, and that the people are unable to even repair their buildings that they've lost, that have been impacted over the years. So they keep staying in the same building, with no defense mechanisms, and the floods come and they keep on being displaced by the flood. So the victims are the ones who are bearing the brunt of this crisis. Now it's a national problem. If we don't have a national plan, whatever the states do may not adequately respond to the problem. We need to have a master flood handling plan, and then the sub-nationals would have certain action plans to respond, to bring to effect these national policies and national plans that are drawn up at the center. If you just throw money at them, recently the government gave the state 3 billion naira each. That may not result to flood resilience. We need to build real resilience across board, and this is where climate finance should go to. But globally, climate finance is going mainly to mitigation measures, not to adaptation measures. And nationally, I don't even know which one we are emphasizing on, because by now we should have stopped land filling or land reclamation of our wetlands. Without our wetlands being restored, being protected, we're going to have more flood impacts.
Okay.
When people keep on building estates and building all kinds of things everywhere, without regard to where the waters would sink into the ground at, then we're going to have a lot more problems.
Well, Mr. Bassi, I'll ask you this one question again on this same issue that you're raising. My sincere apologies. You talked about, all these issues that you have raised. Who should be at the forefront of it? That's really the question that I'm asking, because I'm not sure that we have quite counted the cost. Okay, let me ask Mr. Jabo, from what you know, who should be, are we able to count the costs, really? Mr. Jabo, are we able to value the losses that we experience as a result of this whole thing?
Yeah, the cost from flood damages are very, very phenomenal. And the responsibility is for everyone. Everyone to do what is expected of him or her. Because flooding, like I said, knows no boundary, and therefore attempt to mitigate or reduce the impact falls on everyone. For instance, NISA is an institution that is doing its own part, doing the forecast. The information is given out. Those state government, local government authorities state institutions like SEMA, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, everyone is expected to play a role so that, like you said, the cost is very phenomenal. So it is the responsibility of everyone. No one should be blamed. But my view is that, like I always said, prevention is always better than cure. If this information about flooding year in, year out is there in public domain, and recommendations are given as what to do to the institutions responsible at the state, local government level, even at the federal level, like NISA do forecast and NIMED do forecast, then NEMA carries on with relief materials and evacuation of communities. Those communities that have been forecasted to suffer heavy flooding, they should know, like I said, the time it is going to occur and the locations. People should take proactive measures to move to higher land before the flooding even happens, so that way some of these devastations that we witness every year can be reduced or minimized.
You know, I hear you, Mr. Jabo. Just 1 second.
Your question,
I hear you, but I'm always concerned when I hear that we're advising people to move to higher grounds. The emotional connection, Mr. Arigbabu, let me bring that to you. The emotional connection that people have to their ancestral homes, their properties, and all of those things, they are there. But I want to ask this question around planning, town planning, urban planning, and all of that. It's the reason I keep going back to the States. And I apologize. I hope it doesn't look like I'm just trying to look for someone to lay blame on. We know, just as you said, we know flood paths, we know flood plains, we know that these areas are likely to be flooded. Now, we know that the people who had been living in these flood plains, they have been living in danger all the while. But rather than put them off, we give other people permission to live in those environments. Another example is power lines. We know that people are not supposed to live near power lines. In Lagos alone, for instance, there's somewhere around Iju that people are practically living under these power lines, God forbid any emergency. And same thing is happening for floodplains. You talked about the areas that people would need, they know that these things are going to happen. If we saw them, if we permitted them to live in those areas, simply because the flooding happens maybe just a brief period in a year, have we not enabled the people to live there and consequently put their lives in jeopardy?
So this can be divided into two. The first is to talk about people having historical attachment to certain areas, and you can't take that away. It happens everywhere in the world. But reality is that things are changing, and for safety of life and for the perpetuation of their lineage and, tribe, sometimes people have to take some very serious decision to preserve lives over heritage. And that is not to undermine or underplay the importance of heritage and culture and attachment to the lands. The other side is what happens in the urban area mostly, where many of the times people really do not have that much of attachment other than survival or right of first comers. Oh, we got here first and we have started to build. You see, it goes back to what we say about consequences. A state like Lagos, for instance, has suffered in the hands of, unfortunately, from the past, unscrupulous civil servants who have given permits to people to build where they shouldn't, or those who have looked the other way where new settlements were developing and didn't ensure that things are done according to because Lagos is a state that has plans. If people don't comply with the planning, it's a different thing. Most part of Lagos, there's some scheme or what have you. There are schemes that are supposed to be for agriculture. There are some that are supposed to be for residential. There are some that are supposed to be for commercial. But many a times you find people violating. That's why you find most of Surulere places that are supposed to be strictly residential are now largely commercial. You even find nightclubs and all. So we have this penchant, you know, for violating the rules. Unfortunately, some people permit it. That's why I say it comes back to no consequences. There are people who have retired 20 years back, 30 years back, not just Lagos, it happens everywhere, even in Festac, where you have federal housing authorities. Now you're having government thinking of, do we need to, you know, remove some houses so that there could be sanity here? But where were those people who permitted for those structures to come in place? Even if they have retired, we need to bring them back to face some consequences. That's the only way we are going to ensure that the madness stops. Until that is done, people think that everything they do in civil service, once they are done and gone, other people can live with the mess. That's why today, Lagos State government is having a Herculean task of moving people or, you know, bringing down houses. You know, sometimes government looks harsh and wicked, but some things are reality. You got to do, you got to move people, you got to help them save their own lives, or you got to at least move them away so that other people's lives and properties will be saved. And these are some of the tough decisions that governments needs to make. Unfortunately, politicians shy away from some of these things. That's why you find in many places across the country, you find people where they should not be. And then there's one more thing I need to mention, really. Often also when government tells people to move, aside from the fact that the information push people into a state of inertia, they don't know where to move to, there's no support. When you go to, we have been to many states where we have had incidents of flooding. They don't know about that their states even have state emergency management agency. Lagos has a very proactive one. But many states, even states that have, the best they see is NEMA. And that's why NEMA is such an octopus, almost everywhere. But what is important is that in all of those places where you say people should move and they fail to move, it is historical lack of trust in government. Even in Lagos, it's there. The people of Morocco have their experiences. So when government comes and says, look, you need to move from this place, because the people want to be sure that you're not going to move them, upgrade the place, and sell to only the rich. So we need to also deal.
That some people say have happened before.
It has happened even here in Lagos. It happened under Raji Rasaki, you know, and subsequent civilian government that came didn't do anything to address that injustice. And there are so many of such across the country. So where you have this historical lack of trust between government and citizens, people would rather stay where they are and, you know, damn the consequences than trust government, because they are like, we are moving from pan to fire.
Mr. Bassi, do you agree with Mr. Rigbabu about consequences, bringing back those who gave permits that's causing the loss of lives and livelihood today, to come and answer some questions? Recently, the Environment Commissioner in Lagos has gone out of town, you know, all over the place, pulling down not just houses, but estates. The same thing has happened in the FCT. Incidentally, these are the two former capitals. One is the current capital of the nation. To pull down whole estates just so as to preserve the environment. Do you think that's a good way to go, to call back those who perform these, what some will call heinous acts, to come back, answer those questions so that others who are in service now can take a lesson?
You know, that's a very difficult question, and it's also a difficult challenge. I think it all goes down to the issue of governance. Public officials should actually ensure that they follow policies of government. That's what they pay to do. And if people make approvals for infrastructure that are located at places that create crisis for other people, of course there should be consequences. There should be. And there's a lack of this fact that we don't have these consequences, maybe because of political reasons, maybe one factor why this is going on. But you know, we may be looking at the big cities, Lagos, Abuja, but what is happening in the poorer communities? What is happening in Borno State, where the dam burst last year and created serious floods and displaced almost 1 million people? What is happening at Yetoro in Ondo State that has lost almost half of its territory to flooding and sea level rise? What is happening to Sangana and Bayelsa State? What is happening even in Akwa Ibom State? We need to look at how the government is constructing its infrastructure itself, not just individuals. Are we having climate-proof infrastructure? The highways we're building, the concrete highways, coastal highway, for example, is it climate-proof? Would it stand against when these floods come? What are the considerations? We need to have a public debate about this. And it's very critical that we have a national agreement. The states, the subnational should meet with the center and agree on how to distribute the action that needs to be taken. We can't have these episodic responses once in a while. There has to be an integrated response to the issue. It's about planning, planning, planning. Even at the community level, there's need for communities, the leaders and the associations to meet together and agree on where can be built upon and where must be left, so that when the waters come, they have a way of escaping and not affecting people. How are we protecting our communities? How are we protecting our cities? What are the drainage plans? What are the flood resilience plans? These are the critical issues. Then those who don't implement those decisions made cannot just go scot-free without facing the consequences of their actions. And the consequences could include not just imprisonment, but it could include having them ensuring consequences not just on the people, but having those assigned these duties to know that the duties that are being given are such that would have serious implications and consequences if they fail in duties and maybe play just to the rhythm, to the beat of those who want to grab everything and not care about those who will be victimized and who will suffer for when these floods come.
You know, looking at the pictures on the screen right now, it's very, very heartbreaking. Very, very, very heartbreaking. And to imagine that some of these things, some of these decisions may have been made just for money, that whatever the amount is, it ends with the word only. In other words, it's not more than that. Mr. Jabo, I know that, in fact, let me even ask you, perhaps from an emotional or sentimental side, because I can't imagine what NISA and NIMET and the rest of the agencies of government in this space go through when you predict something, you tell people this is what is likely to happen. It seems like people avoid the issues you are raising. How do you feel when you see the consequences of inactivity or disobedience that could have been avoided if your advice, your counsel, particularly again to the various state governments, was heeded? How does it feel?
Yes, actually, we feel so sad about the whole thing. So sad in the sense that all the effort we put in, year out, we still witness this kind of level of destruction by flooding in the society, on infrastructure, and on the ecosystem. And particularly, it's not that this information is not in public domain before these things happened. The information are there. So, like I said, everyone has a role to play in this issue of mitigation of the negative impact of climate change. If everyone, like we are saying, we are talking about issue of town planners who approve for building plan, who give land in flood-prone areas for people to construct structures. So the issue is this, like I said, everybody has one thing or the other to play to mitigate the impact of flooding. It takes a multifaceted approach to really reduce these destructions that we are seeing in the society. Okay. So my appeal still is this. When these notifications are given out, we are appealing to people to please adhere to these notices.
Okay, just 1 second. On that issue, Mr. Jabo, just 1 second, Mr. Jabo, yes. And I'll still stick with you. What can the people themselves do, particularly those who have no alternatives nowhere else to go. That's the reason it seems like, you know, my attention is on the state governments and maybe even the local governments. But what can the people themselves, look at what's on the screen, Mr. Jabo. What could the people have done? Where could they have gone to? They have no alternatives. Their lives, their livelihood is usually just, you know, cycloned in just one area. So what do you think the people themselves can do?
Yes, sir. First of all, people who are prone to flooding must first of all know their status. If, for instance, your house or your business is located along the riverbanks, waterways, floodplains, low-lying areas, these are areas that are prone to flooding every year. So what we expect from particularly the state government is, having known that these people are vulnerable to flooding year in, year out, is to find a way of permanently relocating those settlements, irrespective of this cultural settlement that is attached to land, buildings, and so on. Life is so important. And because of such sentiment, we cannot afford to leave people to suffer this type of casualties. So the thing is to be very bold, relocate these communities entirely to higher ground, or we can build displacement camps for these people, so that during this period that they are very, very vulnerable, they can go temporarily, relocate them temporarily to these structures, so that they can wait after maybe the end of the flooding season. People can now come back to their homes and continue with their life businesses. Because, like you rightly said, yes, people are really powerless. They are not economically strong to really even help themselves. So that is where we expect the government, not only government, even non-governmental organizations, the private sector, to come in to assist these vulnerable communities by doing one thing or the other that can safeguard their lives, safeguard their livelihood, and then restore hope to these people. We cannot afford to leave people like this suffering this kind of casualty year in, year out, year in, year out. It is the responsibility of everyone, like I am saying. If everyone plays his or her own part down to individual level, we can seriously minimize this impact that
Thank you.
we are
Thank you
seeing.
so much, Mr. Jabo. There is something that, you know, Mr. Jabo just mentioned now. Mr. Arigbabu and Mr. Basa, I'd like you to speak to it very, very quickly. How possible that is, that people should know their status, the status of their environments. Do you think that will help in staving off this annual disaster?
It is very important, because at the end of the day, each person is responsible for their own well-being, their own safety, their own lives. Even though we have state responsibilities, but, you know, people have, and the reality is that there are some parts of the world, you know, that are already overtaken, you know, by realities of climate. Islands are disappearing, you know, so relocating communities, yeah, might be an extreme measure, but yes, it's one of the measures that will work in some places, that there are no alternatives.
Which is
but somebody has to lead in that response, and the government must build trust. Not that you move people from a place and then the place becomes a riviera for, you know, for the rich.
Okay, Mr. Bassi.
Yes, I think the challenge is that we have a system where the victims of climate change, victims of flooding are left to cater for themselves. Even when funds are provided to take care of them, maybe in displaced people's camps, there's actually very little transparency. Infrastructure that's broken for many years are still yet to be repaired. Recently, I watched a simulation, computer simulation of the impact of flooding and canalization on coastal communities. So you can actually predict in the next 5-10 years which areas are going to be lost to the ocean. And you could see people pointing to the ocean and say, my house, my family used to live there, right in the ocean. So the attachment, the displacement, and the impact on communities, on the people's well-being is so enormous.
Absolutely.
And we can't place the blame on the people. The blame
and that's a very, very important point to make there, Mr. Bassi, the fact that the victims are the ones that we continue to vilify, which really shouldn't be. Consequently, hence the reason we are asking that governments at various levels should do the needful. The federal government, I don't think the federal government can know what's happening in the states enough. Forgive me, I've been accused of always saving the federal government and looking at and castigating the states. That's not the case. The federal government has its own problems, absolutely no problem. But can we pay attention to the people who can actually affect people's lives directly? That's the reason this whole thing is, because we can go ahead and give you the stories that will make the headlines. But how about impact on the people's lives? That's what this whole conversation is about. Thank you so much, Mr. Nimo Bassi, environmental activist, for your perspective this morning. Mr. Stephen Jabo, head of the Department of Hydrogeophysics and technical advisor to the DG Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, NISA. We appreciate your time this morning, as well as Mr. Suleiman Aribabu, Executive Secretary, HEDA Resource Center. Thank you so much for your time today. Now, we move to another conversation this morning, again, about the states, but maybe not just the states. We'll be right back to talk about it.